Today, we delve into a shockingly tragic and profoundly unsettling story that has haunted a small town for years. It's the case of a beautiful, spirited young woman who vanished without a trace, leaving her family, friends, and community grasping for answers in the wake of her mysterious and devastating disappearance. This is the story of Rebecca Gould, a vibrant 22-year-old with her entire life ahead of her. Rebecca's case shook the small town of Melbourne, Arkansas, to its core. The sense of security that had long defined the area was shattered as the truth of her fate slowly emerged. The bloodied crime scene and the agonizing uncertainty of what happened to her weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. For years, the details remained a haunting enigma. 16 long years passed before the full truth finally came to light, revealing a narrative more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Rebecca Gould was born on April 28, 1982, in Melbourne, a quaint town nestled in the heart of Arkansas. She grew up in a loving household alongside her three sisters. Life, however, wasn't without its challenges. When Rebecca was still young, her parents divorced, a seismic event that left a deep impact on the family. Despite the initial struggles, this shift in their family dynamic ultimately brought the Gould sisters closer together. Raised by their mother, the girls frequently visited their father, maintaining a strong bond with him. The sisters developed a unique connection, a sisterhood forged in shared experiences, and an unyielding commitment to one another's happiness. After graduating high school, she enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College in Fayetteville, where one of her sisters was already a student. This proximity allowed them to maintain their close relationship while pursuing their academic goals. Despite the challenges of juggling studies and personal life, Rebecca and her sister made it a point to visit their family whenever possible, even though it required frequent trips of over 25 miles. These visits underscored Rebecca's deep-rooted love for her family and her desire to stay connected with her loved ones. By September 2004, Rebecca was on the cusp of significant life changes. She had spent years excelling in her studies and was now preparing to transfer to the University of Arkansas, a major step forward in her academic journey. But before embarking on this exciting new chapter, Rebecca planned to complete one final semester at Northwest Arkansas Community College. That September, as summer gave way to autumn, she decided to visit her family for the weekend alongside her sister. It was a routine trip, the kind of weekend getaway she had made countless times before, but this time the outcome would be devastatingly different. On Sunday, September 19, 2004, Rebecca and her sister drove home to Melbourne, eager to spend time with their loved ones. That evening, after enjoying the warmth of family togetherness, Rebecca left to visit her boyfriend, Casey, who lived in a nearby town. Her plan was simple: spend the evening with him and return to pick up her sister the next day for their drive back to Fayetteville. However, when the agreed-upon time came, Rebecca was nowhere to be found. Her sister tried calling her repeatedly, but Rebecca didn't answer. Initially, the family was not overly concerned. They reasoned that Rebecca, being an adult, might have simply decided to sleep in or extend her stay with friends. It wasn't until later that day, as the hours dragged on with no word from Rebecca, that unease began to creep in. By the evening, worry had taken hold. The family clung to the hope that she had merely chosen to stay an extra day and would return soon. But by the next morning, that hope gave way to fear. Rebecca was still missing, and no one had seen or heard from her. Her mother decided it was time to call the police. The investigation began with Rebecca's last known whereabouts. Police learned she had dropped Casey off at the cafe where he worked on the morning of September 20th. According to Casey, Rebecca had planned to return to his house, pack her belongings, and then meet her sister for their drive back to college. He said Rebecca had also promised to pick him up from work later that day, but she never showed. When Casey realized she hadn't come, he waited for her in the parking lot. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of Rebecca. Eventually, Casey decided to join some friends at a party, leaving behind unanswered questions about her disappearance. The police conducted a thorough interview with Casey and then asked to search his home. He willingly granted them access, and what they found raised more questions than answers. Rebecca's car was still parked outside. Inside the house, her purse, containing her IDs, was found untouched. Even more unsettling, her beloved dog was still there, wandering the home without its owner. Casey also mentioned that Rebecca had packed a small suitcase with clothes for her trip back to Fayetteville, but the suitcase was nowhere to be found. The police were growing increasingly uneasy. The circumstances were undeniably strange. Rebecca had vanished without taking her car, her purse, or her dog. It didn't make sense for her to have left voluntarily. The house, however, held an even more sinister clue. One of the officers noticed something peculiar. The mattress on the bed appeared to be unevenly placed and lacked any bedding. Acting on suspicion, the officer lifted the mattress and uncovered large red stains that bore a chilling resemblance to blood. This discovery prompted a more thorough search of the house, during which the police uncovered additional blood stains, some smeared on the floor and others splattered on the wallpaper. In the washing machine, they discovered bedding with bloodstains, and elsewhere in the house, a substantial number of bleach bottles were found. This pointed to a grim conclusion. Someone had likely attempted to clean up a violent crime scene. The mounting evidence strongly suggested that Rebecca Gould's fate might have been sealed within these walls, and that she might no longer be alive. Despite the ominous findings, investigators lacked definitive proof to determine whose blood it was. DNA analysis would take several days to process, leaving the police with a growing list of questions but no immediate answers. As forensic experts continued to meticulously examine the house for further evidence, detectives turned their attention to Rebecca's boyfriend, Casey, who had been the last known person to see her alive. Given the presence of a large amount of blood in his house, he quickly became a key figure in the investigation. Casey, however, denied any involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. He told investigators that the last time he saw her was the previous morning. Since then, he claimed, she had not been in touch. According to his account, after spending the night with friends, he returned home briefly to change before heading to work. He insisted that he had neither noticed any bloodstains on the floor or walls, nor smelled the strong scent of bleach in his house. Curiously, he said he had not thought much of Rebecca's car being parked outside or some of her belongings being left in the room. Despite his statements, the police were reluctant to take his account at face value. While Casey's alibi was corroborated by his friends, who confirmed he was with them until the morning, investigators remained cautious and kept him under scrutiny. But as the evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that foul play was involved. This horrifying realization sent shockwaves through the community. Melbourne, a town known for its close-knit, friendly atmosphere, was now the epicenter of a dark and disturbing mystery. Rumors spread like wildfire, and fear gripped the residents. Everyone wanted to know, what happened to Rebecca Gould? To expand their investigation, detectives decided to interview everyone who had been with Casey on the night of Rebecca's disappearance. His friends' accounts aligned with Casey's timeline, providing him with a seemingly solid alibi. Despite this, the police still had no definitive answers about Rebecca's fate. Her calls had gone unanswered since the morning of the previous day, and the lack of clarity about her whereabouts left a gnawing uncertainty. During the investigation, Casey suggested that the police look into Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, Justin. Detectives reached out to Justin, but he was initially unresponsive, further raising suspicions. Justin's absence coinciding with Rebecca's disappearance made him a person of interest. 2 days later, however, Justin contacted the police, explaining that he had been at a casino with his father during the time in question. His alibi was confirmed, clearing him of suspicion. The police continued to pursue leads, reconstructing Rebecca's timeline on the day of her disappearance. This effort led to a critical discovery. Detectives learned that Rebecca had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace on the morning of her disappearance. Surveillance footage and employee accounts confirmed that she had purchased a sandwich for breakfast and then headed toward Casey's house. The untouched sandwich was later found in Casey's home, suggesting that Rebecca had returned there after leaving the gas station. This critical piece of evidence established a clear timeline. Rebecca had arrived at Casey's house, and shortly thereafter, something terrible had happened to her. Notably, Casey had been at work during this time, casting doubt on his direct involvement in any crime committed at that hour. As investigators pieced together these events, they received the results of the DNA analysis on the blood found in Casey's house. The blood was conclusively matched to Rebecca. This chilling confirmation intensified the urgency of the investigation, though forensic experts did not find any foreign DNA in the samples, leaving questions about the identity of the perpetrator unanswered. Detectives broadened their focus, interviewing all of Rebecca's relatives and friends to determine whether anyone close to her might have had a motive to harm her. They also scrutinized Casey's acquaintances, hoping to identify anyone who might have been at his house around the time of Rebecca's disappearance. Despite these exhaustive efforts, investigators found no leads, and the case seemed to stall. The breakthrough came on September 27th, 1 week after Rebecca's disappearance. Tragically, her body was discovered approximately 12 miles from Casey's house. It was located at the base of an embankment near a highway, in an area concealed from view and unlikely to be stumbled upon by chance. The scene offered a chilling glimpse into the perpetrator's actions. Rebecca's body had not been concealed or buried. Instead, it appeared as though the killer had hastily dumped her there and fled. The lack of an attempt to hide the body spoke to a cold indifference, adding another layer of horror to an already devastating case. With the discovery of Rebecca's body, the investigation took on a new dimension. The police now had a crime scene that could potentially yield crucial evidence. However, questions remained. Who could have committed such a heinous act, and why? Medical experts determined that Rebecca Gould had sustained multiple brutal blows to the head with a heavy object, and the official cause of her death was strangulation. This combination of injuries painted a chilling picture of the attack. Strikingly, no defensive wounds were found on her body, which led experts to conclude that the victim had been completely caught off guard, likely incapacitated before she could even grasp what was happening. Additionally, there was no evidence of sexual assault, further complicating the task of identifying a motive for the heinous crime. As for the time of death, according to medical estimates, Rebecca's body lay for about a week. However, they could not provide a more precise timeline due to the state of decomposition. Meanwhile, the detectives made a significant discovery in their investigation: the possible murder weapon. In Casey's house, there was a piano that appeared to be missing one of its legs. These piano legs were known to be quite heavy, and upon inspection, medical experts confirmed that the shape of Rebecca's head injuries was consistent with such an object. When questioned, Casey stated that the piano leg had been loose for some time and could have been easily removed. However, despite extensive searches, the missing leg was nowhere to be found, neither in Casey's house nor near the location where Rebecca's body was discovered. The absence of the piano leg, coupled with other puzzling details, steered detectives toward exploring potential motives for the crime. They quickly ruled out robbery, as nothing of value appeared to be missing from the house except for Rebecca's suitcase and the piano leg. Investigators also dismissed the possibility of a sexually motivated crime, which left them grappling with the likelihood that the killer's sole intention had been to murder Rebecca. This raised chilling questions about whether the crime had been premeditated and whether the perpetrator might have had a personal connection to her. The timing of Rebecca's death offered additional clues. Investigators theorized that she was killed shortly after returning to Casey's house that morning. This suggested that the perpetrator might have been aware of her schedule or had been following her movements, knowing that Casey would be at work and the house would be empty. The absence of any signs of forced entry indicated that Rebecca might have willingly let the killer inside, which further pointed to the possibility that she knew her assailant. According to investigators, the killer had likely spent several hours in the house after the murder, meticulously attempting to clean up the crime scene. The presence of bleach bottles and partially cleaned bloodstains suggested a deliberate effort to eliminate evidence. After attempting this cleanup, the perpetrator appeared to have carried Rebecca's body, loaded it into a vehicle, and transported it to the embankment where it was later found. The sheer audacity of this act, disposing of the body in a relatively open yet concealed area, demonstrated a disturbing level of calculation. Despite these insights, the case quickly hit a wall due to a glaring lack of concrete evidence. Detectives faced the monumental task of sifting through hundreds of potential suspects, including Rebecca's acquaintances, Casey's friends, neighbors, and even residents of nearby towns. They also fielded numerous tips from the public, but these often led nowhere, Many of the tips were baseless accusations fueled by gossip or personal grudges, and none brought investigators closer to identifying the killer. Frustration mounted as months turned into years, and eventually, the case went cold. The investigation was reopened several times over the following years, with new teams of detectives hoping to shed light on the mystery. However, each effort ended in failure. The dual challenges of a complete lack of evidence and the absence of a clear motive rendered the case one of the most perplexing in the area's history. As time passed, the case attracted significant attention from the true crime community, becoming a topic of fascination for TV shows, podcasts, and online forums. The mystery surrounding Rebecca Gould's death became a rallying point for amateur sleuths eager to uncover the truth. One such individual was George Jared, a journalist who had been following the case since its inception. George's deep interest in the story led him to write a book about Rebecca's murder and launch his own podcast, dedicated to exploring every angle of the case. Despite years of effort, he remained determined to find answers. His work eventually brought him into contact with Jennifer Buchholz, a former counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army who had also become deeply invested in the case. Jennifer brought a unique analytical perspective to the investigation, and together, they decided to pool their resources and expertise. George and Jennifer created a Facebook group to share their insights and theories, inviting subscribers to join the discussion. The group quickly gained traction, drawing in people from around the world who were captivated by the unsolved mystery. Among the most active participants was a man named William Miller. Miller's contribution stood out for two reasons. First, he lived in the Philippines, making his intense interest in a small-town American murder case seem unusual. Second, he was extraordinarily active in the group, frequently posting detailed comments and engaging directly with George and Jennifer through private messages. Miller's enthusiasm for the case bordered on obsessive. He offered numerous theories about the crime, dissected controversial aspects of the investigation, and even suggested possible scenarios that might explain Rebecca's murder. At first, his insights were welcomed as those of a particularly passionate amateur sleuth. However, as time went on, his behavior began to raise questions among the group's administrators. Why was someone from halfway around the world so deeply invested in a case with no apparent personal connection? And why did Miller seem to focus so intently on certain details while avoiding others? The growing unease around Miller's involvement marked a turning point in the investigation. As George and Jennifer delved deeper into his background and motivations, they began to wonder if this seemingly helpful contributor might know more about Rebecca Gould's murder than he was letting on. What had initially seemed like a harmless obsession now carried the weight of a potentially darker implication. Could William Miller hold the key to solving the case? Or was he hiding something far more sinister? William Miller's behavior in the online group grew increasingly peculiar, catching the attention of George and Jennifer, who had already developed an acute sense for unusual patterns in people's interactions with the case. His insights into the area and specific details about Rebecca's murder were far more detailed than the average group member. Over time, his persistent activity and advanced knowledge of facts that weren't widely publicized struck them as suspicious. Quietly, they decided to monitor his comments and direct messages without raising any alarms, aiming to gather as much information as possible before confronting him or alerting authorities. A breakthrough came when another group member, who happened to be a genealogy expert, volunteered to look into Miller's background. This member used publicly available tools and profiles to analyze Miller's connections and stumbled upon a startling discovery. William Miller was Casey's cousin. This revelation shifted the investigation into a new dimension, as it suggested a deeper link to the case. George and Jennifer wasted no time and contacted the detectives working on Rebecca's cold case to share their findings and voice their concerns. When the police revisited the case files, they realized Miller's name had been mentioned during the initial investigation in 2004. Back then, Miller had claimed he was visiting the town to assist another relative and had stopped by Casey's house twice. Once 2 days before Rebecca's disappearance, and again on the day she was last seen. According to Casey's original statement, Rebecca had noticed Miller standing outside through the window during his second visit. When Casey went out to speak with him, Miller reportedly stayed for only 15 minutes before leaving. At the time, this interaction was deemed insignificant. However, with this new context, detectives began to probe deeper into Miller's past. They discovered he had been involved in a series of troubling incidents. In 2002, he had faced charges for allegedly assaulting a minor. Shortly after, he was accused of breaking into his ex-wife's home and attacking her. Despite these charges, Miller had avoided significant legal repercussions. Following these events, he relocated to the Philippines, where he started a family and worked on offshore oil rigs. His sudden departure and history of violent behavior painted a concerning picture, suggesting that he may have been evading his past. Detectives' attempts to contact Miller hit a dead end. His location in the Philippines made him practically unreachable. For years, they could only wait for an opportunity to question him in person. That chance finally came in 2020, when customs officials informed authorities that Miller had returned to the United States, settling in Oregon to visit his elderly mother. When detectives called Miller's mother, she insisted she hadn't seen him in a long time, a statement detectives immediately deemed suspicious. Determined to track him down, they traveled to Oregon, suspecting she was lying to protect her son. With no direct evidence linking Miller to the crime, detectives devised a strategic approach to their interrogation. They needed to tread carefully, coaxing out any incriminating information without making Miller suspicious of their intentions. Detective Mike McNeil, who had recently taken over leadership of the case, initiated the interview in a calm and casual manner. He explained that they were conducting routine follow-ups with everyone who had been connected to the case in any capacity.
You see in the middle is a little box that says cause Rebecca Gould's death, and then it says intentional or accidental. And I'm going to read these boxes to you, right? So when I say, if I ask you, did you cause that woman's death? I'm asking you if you shot Rebecca causing her death. Your answer would be
no.
Okay. And we'll go to the next box. It says you struck Rebecca with an object causing her death. What would your answer be?
No.
And then if I add, you caused Rebecca's death, and the box says
no.
Did you slam Rebecca against something causing her death?
No.
Okay. Did you strangle Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Okay. Did you asphyxiate Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Did you drown Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Or you stabbed Rebecca causing
No.
her death? Or you shot Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Okay. So when I ask you, did you cause Rebecca's death, we're talking about homicide, right? And the answer is
No.
Perfect. How hard is that to answer that question?
Not hard at all.
Right? That's the test, right? That's that. There's some other questions we're going to ask her. We're going to go over those. That's what people, that's what
So that's, how many questions there?
No, just one question, right? So when I ask you, did you cause her death, right? I'm talking about all those things. So when I ask you that, that's what that means, right? Did you cause her death, right? The answer is no. I've seen you. You're calm. You're cool, collected. You're not don't have that anxiety, the nervousness, right? Because we're talking, right?
Yeah.
And I'm explaining to you all the little details.
And better understanding and a lot of stuff. You're making it a lot easier and all this stuff because I'm thinking the worst that, I'm innocent and I come in here and take a lie detector test and hypothetically I fail. My fault, jail.
Miller seemed cooperative at first, agreeing to answer questions and claiming he had nothing to hide. As the conversation progressed, McNeil asked if Miller would be willing to take a polygraph test. Miller hesitated but eventually agreed, likely believing he could pass without issue. However, when McNeil made a show of pretending to call the local police chief to arrange for a polygraph specialist to come to the station, Miller's demeanor shifted. He began fidgeting and stammering, attempting to steer the conversation in a different direction. Unbeknownst to Miller, the polygraph operator was already on site, waiting in a neighboring room. McNeil's staged phone call was part of a ploy designed to increase the suspect's anxiety and potentially prompt him to reveal something incriminating. As McNeil arranged the polygraph, he noticed Miller's growing unease. At one point, Miller asked outright whether polygraph results were admissible in court. McNeil responded ambiguously, saying they could be under certain circumstances, though he avoided mentioning that polygraph results are typically inadmissible due to their controversial reliability. When the polygraph test began, Miller's nerves were evident. The operator's questions included key points about Rebecca's disappearance and murder. Miller's responses consistently indicated deception, especially when asked whether he had been involved in Rebecca's death or knew who was responsible. By the end of the session, the operator concluded that Miller had lied about every critical question.
So the results on the exam of deception indicated, right, so as to the questions of did you,
What do you mean by that?
cause you failed the test.
I have the test.
Yes.
Armed with this result, McNeil returned to the interrogation room, determined to press Miller further. Detective McNeil leaned in, his voice calm but firm, and informed Miller that forensic experts had re-examined the evidence. He claimed that Rebecca's DNA had been found in samples taken from Miller's car. In 2004, investigators had already searched Miller's vehicle, but their efforts yielded no physical evidence linking him to Rebecca's disappearance or murder. They hadn't even taken samples for further analysis. Consequently, no traces of Rebecca's DNA were ever found in Miller's car. Despite this, Detective McNeil decided to employ a controversial but legally permissible tactic during Miller's interrogation. Misleading a suspect is an established practice in law enforcement, often used to elicit a confession. In many cases, the mere suggestion of having incontrovertible evidence can pressure a suspect into revealing the truth. Detective McNeil knew he had no concrete evidence, but he hoped the psychological weight of his claims would push Miller to confess. When the detective told Miller that Rebecca's DNA had been found in his vehicle, Miller's demeanor changed instantly. He became silent, visibly uneasy, and introspective. McNeil doubled down, insisting they had undeniable proof and emphasizing that cooperation would be in Miller's best interest. The strategy worked. After several moments of tension, Miller began to speak. At first, he denied committing the murder, claiming instead that he had stumbled upon Rebecca's lifeless body. According to Miller, he had gone to his cousin's house on the morning of the murder and encountered a masked man standing over Rebecca's bloodied corpse. He insisted he had nothing to do with her death. Detective McNeil, however, wasn't buying this explanation. The story lacked credibility, and McNeil's relentless pressure soon wore Miller down. Interrupting the detective mid-sentence, Miller suddenly admitted, "I'm just going to tell you I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." What followed was a chilling and detailed confession. Miller described his actions on the morning of Rebecca's murder. He said he had been out hunting in the woods near his cousin's home when he decided to visit Rebecca. He explained that he wanted to talk to her for reasons he himself couldn't fully articulate. When Rebecca opened the door, he told her he needed to use the phone. Once inside, Miller pretended to make a call while Rebecca returned to the bedroom. As he paced the living room, Miller claimed he was suddenly overwhelmed by an uncontrollable rage. Grabbing the leg of a piano from nearby, Miller followed Rebecca into the bedroom. She was lying on the bed when he struck her repeatedly on the head with the makeshift weapon. Not content with the brutal assault, he then strangled her to ensure she was dead. Afterward, he wrapped her body in a bedsheet and carried it to his pickup truck. Miller recounted how he meticulously cleaned the crime scene, using bleach to remove blood from the floor, walls, and bedding. He then drove to a remote stretch of highway and disposed of Rebecca's body under an embankment. When asked why he committed such a heinous act, Miller's answer was as baffling as it was disturbing. He simply felt an uncontrollable urge to kill Rebecca, without any tangible motive. Despite expressing regret during his confession, Miller's subsequent actions complicated the case. After his arrest, he was extradited to Arkansas, where he abruptly recanted his confession. He now claimed to be innocent, which threatened to derail the prosecution's efforts. Compounding the problem, procedural issues during his arrest presented further challenges. The arresting officer had failed to fully read Miller his Miranda rights after being interrupted by the suspect. This technical oversight could have rendered Miller's confession inadmissible in court. Additionally, without physical evidence or eyewitness testimony, the case against Miller was precariously thin. By law, a confession alone is insufficient unless it is corroborated by other evidence or reaffirmed before a judge. Fortunately for the prosecution, the judge ultimately deemed Miller's recorded confession admissible. The details Miller provided matched the known facts of the crime, including his familiarity with the area, his cousin's work schedule, and the method of the murder. Despite his initial recantation, Miller's later actions further supported his guilt. In 2022, he agreed to a plea deal, formally confessed to the crime and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. However, this case took an even darker turn after Miller's incarceration. While serving his sentence, he shocked investigators by confessing to several other murders. Miller claimed to have killed 5 additional women over the course of his life, though he couldn't recall their names. According to Miller, he would lure these women into his car, drive them to isolated locations, and kill them. He admitted that he targeted young, slim, petite women with light hair, a description that eerily matched Rebecca's appearance. Detectives began to suspect that Miller might be a serial killer. His work on oil rigs had taken him across multiple states over a 25-year period, providing ample opportunity to commit these crimes. Despite Miller's chilling claims, investigators have yet to uncover any concrete evidence to substantiate his additional confessions. The search for corroborating details is ongoing, as law enforcement agencies across the country review cold cases that match Miller's descriptions. Meanwhile, Miller's confessions have reignited debates about his guilt and motivations. While the official record holds him responsible for Rebecca's murder, skeptics continue to question his involvement. Some believe he may have been coerced into confessing, while others speculate that Rebecca's boyfriend could have been the real killer, with Miller's role limited to helping dispose of the body. Detective McNeil, reflecting on the case, believes Miller's behavior reveals a man burdened by guilt. Miller's participation in an online group discussing Rebecca's murder, where he left numerous comments and interacted with administrators, suggested a compulsion to revisit the crime. If Miller had truly wanted to evade detection, staying silent and avoiding the subject altogether would have been his best course of action. Instead, he seemed drawn to the investigation, perhaps unable to reconcile his actions with his conscience. Ultimately, while Miller's conviction brought some closure to Rebecca's family, the lingering questions about his other alleged crimes and the possibility of additional victims continue to haunt investigators. The truth about Miller's full criminal history may never be known, but for now, he remains behind bars, serving his sentence for a murder that shocked and devastated a community.